One of the other things that causes loads of inefficiencies, which has happened so much this year, is decisions not being made and brands umming and ahhing about when to kickstart. And again, if you can get technology in place that just makes it so that the brand and the agency just get matched up as and when that brand is ready to go, and you don't have to go through all of the charades of the new biz and the marketing and all the chasing up your client to find out what's going on and all of that stuff that ultimately doesn't add value and doesn't serve your goal as a business. Technology will eventually come along, in my opinion, and get rid of all of those shenanigans.
My name's Mike Lander, and you're listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast, where we bring you actionable insights about sales RFPs, negotiations, and difficult procurement discussions from sales leaders, brand leaders, and procurement leaders. Please subscribe to get updates when new episodes are released. Trenton, thanks ever so much for joining me on Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast.
Hey, Mike. Good to be here.
Brilliant. So we've had a pre-recording conversation. We've had a few interactions before that, and also some fun around some LinkedIn posts and some responding comments. So I'm looking forward to this because it should prove to be not only insightful, but entertaining and interesting, given who you are as a character. So
fingers
for
crossed.
everyone listening, it will be. It's bound to be. So for everyone listening, just kind of who are you? Who are you? What's your background? What do you do broadly?
Sure. So, I'm Trenton. I'm the founder and head coach at a business called Team Sterka. So I supercharge agency teams with client leadership skills. So I run a program that does that. It's all about emotional intelligence and people skills. And I know a lot about the agency world. I spent 15 years running my own agency, actually. So I started the agency 20 years ago, almost to the day.
Wow.
2 weeks and 20 years ago. Yeah, long time ago. Showing my age. And I ran my agency for around 15 years, managed to grow it. And then we were acquired a few years ago. And then I exited shortly afterwards and started Team Sterka. And one of the really successful things I did in my agency was launch a client leadership program, because anytime there was a problem with a client, anytime we wanted to upsell to a client, anytime there was a difficult conversation with a client, someone from my leadership team usually had to get involved. So that's where I first ever launched the program. Revenue went up by about 35% from our clients. So yeah, I knew I was on something good.
Oh, wow. So before we get into anything else, so I'll come back to that in 1 second, literally 1 second. So something unusual about yourself, Trenton.
Okay, well, obviously I haven't prepared for this, and you didn't tell me that you were going to ask me this before. But I think the thing that maybe is unusual, that maybe most people haven't done this year, is I decided after COVID and homeschool, my wife and I decided to go back for more homeschool. And we took our kids out of school this year for about 6.5 months and homeschooled them. But also we went backpacking. So we took our kids around a few countries in Africa and Asia and properly backpacked. And saw a bit of the world. It's a bit different to the kind of middle-class South London bubble that we all live in.
Correct. So just interestingly, on that kind of travel for 6.5 months, what would you say was the biggest takeaway, not for you, but for your kids?
Well, I hope what they realize is that the world, for almost everyone in the world, does not have the same level of prosperity as we do in the UK, and in particular, we as a family do in our South London middle class bubble.
Yeah, absolutely. So it gives them an entirely different and very real perspective on how other people live, and often how they purely survive rather than how they thrive.
Yeah, and where we went, most people were surviving. It wasn't about thriving.
Exactly. So yeah, definitely worth keeping at front of mind, I would say. So just before we get into the questions, just if you can encapsulate in a couple of minutes, that 35% growth of an agency and around that client development program, client leadership program. One of the big issues that I see with most agencies and outside agencies, I've worked in professional services for 30 odd years, is growing accounts. Winning it's one thing, but growing it's another. Any kind of top tips on everything you learned about what are the 2 or 3 big things about growing accounts that you need to focus on?
To be honest, I think there's just one big thing, and that's to get everyone involved in it. Now, your guys doing the work, they're not going to be particularly motivated by doing sales. So you're not going to give them sales targets. But what they are motivated by is increasing their skills and being able to handle themselves during those difficult conversations. And what I learned by running the program in my agency was you can teach these skills. Like with anything, some people are naturally quite good at this and other people struggle a bit. But like with any skill, you can all learn it and improve. And for some people, they can get really good at it, and others will get, at best maybe average, but hey, that's better than what they were before. Yeah. And the way we did it was this sustained program every week, literally every week, half an hour on a Friday, 9 to 9:30. You had to be there unless you were sick or on holiday. You couldn't book in a pitch, client work, a workshop, anything. Me as well. Everyone had to be there. It was mandatory. And because of the continuous nature of it, we just ground these skills into the team. And like I said, it was all about emotional intelligence and people skills. So people quite enjoyed the journey they'd go on because they'd learned so much about themselves and increase their own self-awareness. And all the skills we were teaching, they could use them with each other. So our culture really thrived because people could work together even better. And then people were using their skills in their personal life with husbands and wives and partners and housemates and parents and kids, which was, and I used to get all these lovely stories. So it really brought the team together. It was really real positive impact on our culture. And, the aim of it was to improve things with clients. And we got that 35% uplift with our accounts.
And what kind of feedback did you get from clients? Just out of interest, just some headline kind of like comments that you were getting from people.
I'm not sure if it was necessarily about the feedback, but one of the things that we really noticed was work was being signed off more smoothly. People could go in and present their work and they could get it signed off in a way they perhaps couldn't before. And, whereas a client looks at work, gives some feedback, say, can you make these changes, please? Or this is kind of against the brief, so you need to make those fixes. And we'd have to go away and do a few days of unbillable work, but 3 days of unbillable work times 3 people, that adds up. That's kind of much of your profit kind of gone that month.
Exactly.
So that really reduced because people finally understood that when they're going in to meet with a client, it's not just trying to do right by the client. It's about that win-win. It's right, Mr. Client or Mrs. Client, how do I get you to the outcome that you want to get to? And how do I act in the best interest of my business and get us to a good outcome? And people were starting to go in and take a stand for both, whereas previously they were just taking a stand for, well, I've got to please the client.
So anyone that's listening, anyone that's in an agency that's facing those kind of challenges, I would suggest you reach out to Trenton about your client development programs, because that is a core problem that I think most agencies face. So let's get into the questions. So we were at a conference recently and I was speaking and you were very vocal about something, which really, it's important, but it was also just like interesting and in some ways entertaining. Why is the pitch process so ridiculous in your view?
Yes, in my view. It's not a categorical fact. It's solely my opinion. So
it is your opinion, and I may have a different one to you, which is good.
Yeah, so I've led, I don't know, hundreds, God knows how many, right? I've led on hundreds of pitches. And for me, I think it's categorically ridiculous in a crazy process that takes up so much time, so much energy, and I'm not sure that the brand at the end of it necessarily gets the right agency for them. So the reason I think that is that the skills that you need to win at a pitch are completely different to the skills you need to deliver the work. So pitching, I'm quite good at pitching, I think. But I'm terrible at delivering the work. I'm terrible at managing the client on an ongoing basis. So we'd go in and pitch, and I would lead the pitch, as not always, but often I'd be the leader of the pitch, so to speak. And I'd bring the team with me who would be delivering the work as well. So the client got to meet the team and we'd all speak an equal amount of time. But make no mistake, I drilled them on what they were going to say, right? Yeah. Like I directed that. And it's all about, high impact, kind of jazz hands, painting this really pretty picture in the eye of the beholder and working out, if we can work out who we're pitching against, trying to work out what our USPs are and putting like little digs in about, you wouldn't want to hire someone who does this. Like we were in London and they were in London. So if we knew we were pitching against 2 agencies out of London, we would go hell to leather on, you need to work with a London agency. We can be in your office. We can collaborate. And there is some truth to that, don't get me wrong, but we would hammer that point. And then if you compare that to when you're working with a client, it's completely different. All of that competitiveness disappears and you're working collaboratively as a team, not with jazz hands, but on an ongoing, long-term, deep and meaningful basis to help the client achieve on their business goals. It's such different skills. So I think the charade on the pitch is mad and is a bit ridiculous. But the other thing that's kind of ridiculous is if you've got an educated buyer and a mature market where essentially the agencies who are pitching are all the same. They all kind of work the same and have similar prices and similar cultures and similar ways of working. And I remember when I was the last few years of running my agency, when the industry really matured, and maybe I'd find out who we were pitching against, right? And it would be two of the usual suspects. And I knew deep down, it doesn't matter who you choose. We're the same price. We got the same ways of working. They do great work. We do great work. And we do it in roughly the same way. And you know what? Sliding doors moment. Imagine if the client picked one of those three agencies. If all of us were really busy, we may all end up using the same freelancer to deliver the work anyway. Right. So, I think the pitch process is ridiculous for two reasons. Number one, because the skills required to win at a pitch are wholly different to the skills required to deliver the work. And number two, often, not always, but often the brand will get in 3 or 4 very similar agencies and they could all deliver the work really as well as each other. So for me, a much better way of doing it would be to kind of go and talk to a bunch of agencies and get a rough idea. Just have a conversation, get a rough idea therefore. Speak to 5 or 6 agencies and say, look, I'm just chatting, just want to have a chat, tell you a bit about our requirements, what we're up to, want to hear from you about what you do and any ideas for how we might approach this. Go and speak to a bunch of agencies, short conversation, get a rough idea of what you want, and then choose 3 of them to come in and pay them to do a small piece of work with you, which might be a day-long collaborative workshop together, or it might be a week-long engagement or something like that, but something small. Do something small with, say, 2 or 3 of them, and then you've worked with the team, right? Mm-hmm. And you've got a feel for who you work best with, because probably the reason you should choose one ahead of the other is just that chemistry. If there's people that you just gel with, and you're not going to get that from a pitch, right? But you are going to get that if you actually work together. And if you basically get rid of the guy like me who's directing that pitch, who's going to add no value to the account long term, right? I'll rock up for some important presentations and liaise with some senior client person who might come to that presentation. But that's it, right? I'm not adding that much value to that account. So get me out the equation and see what it's like to actually work with the agency. And then you'll probably enjoy working with all of them. So just make a decision and just go with one of them.
So I don't think anyone would disagree that one of the key factors for success with an agency that you appoint is your ability to work together. I was talking to a guy yesterday who's a global branding expert, and he talks about differentiation now with brands often is around experience rather than the product itself. I think what you're alluding to here is the same, is that the product is broadly quite similar, but the experience can be extremely different. So you've got to find out about the experience. However, here's the challenge. So there's a couple of dimensions, I think, on this. One, if you're a global brand and you're a $10 billion turnover CPG company, you're going to have an awful lot of marketing work that you'll be doing. Different types. You'll be doing organic, you'll be doing some social, you'll be doing media, you'll be doing all sorts. And therefore, and there's a big spend as well. So there's a big spend. You're a public company. So there's a governance issue. Do you think that approach works irrespective of scale, number of projects, type of project? It's not a loaded question. It's a genuine discussion.
It's a really great question, Mike, because what I've just described, if you're procuring an agency to come in and, I don't know, run SEO for 20K a month or whatever, then that kind of approach easily works, easily. But once you scale that up, to multi-million pounds across, multiple disciplines, it's very, very different. I mean, perhaps it could work because perhaps you then break it down into those disciplines, or you break it down into the departments, because you maybe won't work with one agency, or maybe you will. So perhaps you you can just, if you're thinking of procuring someone, for social and for SEO and so on and so on, perhaps you could apply that process. It's a great question, and I haven't thought about that before. Perhaps you can just break that down into manageable chunks.
And I think the challenge on the buy side, and procurement haven't bathed themselves in glory. Marketing procurement have not bathed themselves in glory in the last kind of 20 years, to be honest. There has been a massive culture of reducing cost. And there's lots of evidence now, and in fact, a research by Kantar recently about if you look at the impact of the outcome of advertising, there's a huge premium on highly creative, really well thought through strategic ideas versus a cheaper agency that does an okay job and it looks fine. The difference is like 4-1. It's colossal. So the very idea that procurement can drive cost through the floor and still get amazing outcomes is frankly ludicrous. But I think there is a challenge, which is there's a volume problem. There often aren't many people in marketing procurement, and there's a lot to do. And an RFP process is well-trodden path. So you go down the well-trodden path. So I think it is a challenge. I think I spoke to a couple of people recently, Gareth, who ran Weetabix. So he was the CMO for Weetabix. And he said, it isn't always the right way to go down an RFP process. Sometimes it is better to just find the agencies you want to work with and start working with them. Same with the guy from Kazoo who ran global marketing for Kazoo. So I think, there's a time and a place when you can just find the right agencies to work with based on the experiences that you have with them. But sometimes you need to run an RFP process and it's more formal.
Well, and there's also, like you're saying, there needs to be a certain level of governance because, maybe, I don't know, 40 years ago and, before that, you just brought in your mates, right? Whoever would take you out for the most expensive, most boozy, most funnest lunch. And again, that's not fair. It shouldn't be that way. So there's no.
Correct.
So whilst I do think that the pitching process is ridiculous, I do understand the reason for an RFP. And there's no silver bullet. There's no magical, this is the right solution. Because without procurement, it becomes that Wild West. And it becomes a bit sketchy and unfair in terms of how agencies are chosen.
Exactly right. So let's move on to the next question, which is, why will technology disrupt the sales process for agencies? It's a really interesting question. And not just AI, but beyond AI. What's going to happen?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was interesting because when I was saying that last comment, I was kind of thinking, this segues nicely into the next conversation point. because it is such an imperfect process and you can't make it perfect or even close to that because there's too many agencies out there offering the same thing, right? Yeah. So how do you make it fair? But what has happened for me consistently over centuries is technology literally always comes along to replace labor-intensive activities. So you look a few hundred years ago, we all worked on farms, and then technology came along, and hardly any of us work on farms. Almost all of it's done with technology. So we all went and worked in factories. Industrial revolution came along, and then lo and behold, technology came along, and it replaced the need for so many of us to work in factories. So we invented the services industry about 100 years ago, and we all went and worked in services. And technology is now coming along to replace some of those services. The same thing will happen at some point for the whole sales and marketing process, because if you think about it, the amount of time and effort we spend in sales and marketing as agencies is enormous. So let's just say our day rates are, make it easy. Let's just say they're £1,000 a day, right? Imagine if we didn't have to spend any time or resource on sales and marketing. What kind of discount can we therefore give to our client? A third, maybe? A quarter?
Maybe.
We could really reduce rates and make things more effective. And all of that sales and marketing effort doesn't actually add value.
Right.
As agencies, we're here to deliver X services, and our core purpose is usually around, excellence around that core service. So at some point, and I've no idea when, and I've no idea how, but at some point, I do believe, and I think it will happen in my lifetime, technology will be created and will be invented and will cut down 90% of the sales and marketing effort that we have to go through, and we'll connect brands to agencies at the exact time that the brand needs the work so they can just kickstart and get going. One of the other things that causes loads of inefficiencies, which has happened so much this year, is decisions not being made and brands umming and ahhing about when to kickstart. And again, if you can get technology in place that just makes it so that the brand and the agency just get matched up as and when that brand is ready to go, and you don't have to go through all of the charades of the new biz and the marketing and all the chasing up your client to find out what's going on and all of that stuff that ultimately doesn't add value and doesn't serve your goal as a business. Technology will eventually come along, in my opinion, and get rid of all of those shenanigans.
I mean, just kind of building on that point, it is a very interesting point. I was reading the other day, and I've been thinking about this for a while about AI, is that so now agencies are using AI to craft the first kind of draft of an RFP response rightly, and then the smart ones are getting their subject matter experts to edit that heavily to add in the real value, the nuggets, the real insights. But then you go, okay, well, so what? So what next? So what next is, RFPs are starting to be written by AI. So then you've got an RFP written by an AI engine, and you've got a response being drafted by an AI engine, although it's being edited. And as the AI gets better and better, the editing from the SMEs will get smaller and smaller because the bots will learn about the expertise. And then you have a perfectly matched system, a perfectly written RFP and a perfectly responded RFP. The problem is all 5 agencies that respond will read exactly the same. And what happens then? Because now the RFP process is broken. Because to your first point, you really can't select now. Now all you've got is the chemistry meeting, hour-and-a-half pitch to rely on. Because all of the documents look the same. So it's going to have to evolve. Because it will naturally, I don't know what pace that will happen, but I can see it happening already with clients.
Yeah. Maybe the ultimate thing is we have to move to a socialist structure where the work just gets divvied out automatically. Because, let's be honest, again, so many of us agencies, we're just kind of the same. There's so little to differentiate us. And so if we all colluded, said, look, enough of these shenanigans, let's just divvy out the work, maybe that will be more efficient.
Wow. So now we're into an economic, political discussion and social discussion. Should there just be an agency world full of people who are very good marketers, that brands work with the agency world? There is no individual company. It is just one big mass of people, and you match those through a system and select the best people for the job. Interesting thought, Trenton. I don't think we're there yet, but I can see where your thinking's going.
No, because you also you get high performing, you get forming, storming, norming, performing process.
Performing, so exactly.
You can't just throw a bunch of individuals together and expect them to work. So there has to be something about teams in there. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like who knows? But what I do know is that technology will gradually replace, or at least in my prediction, will gradually replace more and more what new biz and marketing people do, because ultimately it doesn't add value to the end game. It's a means to an end. It's a means to win the client, and it's extremely labor intensive. So technology will disrupt that in my lifetime, I believe.
So I think we should check back in 6 months and see what happens. Because I think because your earlier thought about the kind of the Industrial Revolution, those happened over tens or hundreds of years. I don't think we're in that world, are we? Yeah, we're in a world now whereby within months, things are changing rapidly.
Yeah, it'll be. It's very quick.
So we should check back in on that, definitely. So next question. So I think we've covered what happens when markets mature, because you've talked about that in differentiation. What about this? How do you win without pitching using roundtable brand communities? How does that work? First of all, what's the concept? And secondly, how does it work?
Yeah. So when I was running my agency, we started these director level communities for digital directors and design directors, and they were very successful. And we ended up winning a a lot of work without even having to pitch. With big brands, likes of Tesco, who else?
Wow.
RBS, Vodafone,
Wow.
Visa, all of this without pitching. And because basically, look, new business in theory is really, really simple. All you need to do is find your target audience, the people who are the potential buyers, which obviously is really easy on LinkedIn. And then you've got to send them messages that add value to them and get a conversation going and keep that conversation going to continually add value to them so that when they're ready to buy, you're front of mind. Right? That's the theory. And that is, well, that's the practice. That's the practicality. That's what you do. But coming up with things to say to them to keep that conversation going so you're constantly adding value to them is extremely difficult. It's really hard. So what we ended up doing in my agency was we got these communities going, these two communities, one for senior design people and one for senior digital people. And they were kind of exclusive communities, so it was invite only. And we'd have a round table every month. It was in our office. We had a good space for events there, so we could host around 40, 50 people. So we do these round tables every month. They all came in. About 30 people across both communities would come in each month. And they didn't care about me and us, right? They were there to meet each other because they're all running teams of between 10 and 100 people, varying sizes of teams. And they're all very lonely because they're the leader of the team and their boss doesn't really get what they do. And, no one in their team is saying, hey, good job, boss. Doesn't really work that way. So, and they were just finding themselves just constantly banging, when you're working leadership, most business, but any big business, you just feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall half the time and the stakeholder treacle you have to wade through. So for them, just coming to this round table every month and meeting their peers was just so therapeutic. But more than that, we had a structure to it. And so we got them talking about everyone had to kind of bring a challenge that they're facing at work and would vote for two challenges that we wanted to talk about. And then we spoke about those two challenges. So people got loads of value from it, really enjoyed it. But what it was for us was two things. Number one, it meant talk about having your ear to the ground. Is that an expression? Ear to the ground? Yeah. I think it is. Talk about having your ear to the ground in terms of the pain points of what our clients were facing. That was amazing. So then when we would go in and pitch, on the times we did have to pitch, we could reference things that we would hear in our groups. It's like, right, we know your challenges are this, this, and this. Because no one cares what you say, right? They care how you make them feel. And when you're going to pitch, you've got to try and differentiate yourself. So let's say things that are going to resonate with you. And to hell with the brief, let's just show you some empathy. So that was really helpful for us to know what was going on really in the minds of our target audiences. But they'd then come in our office. We had posters of our work up everywhere. They got exposed to our brand. And even if they didn't come every month, because many of them didn't come every month, we were still emailing them every month. And we'd still be sending an email shot saying, next roundtable is happening on this date. Are you coming? And if they didn't reply after a week or two, they'd get a follow-up saying, just checking, it's happening on this date. Here's the sort of people who are signed up already. Are you coming? So we had a reason to reach out to these guys twice a month, every single month. So when the likes of, the guys at Tesco and RBS and Vodafone and so on, when they were ready to buy, when they needed something, they just contacted us. And and the esteem they held us in was very high. Someone said this to me once, so I assume this carried through to everyone else. Survey sample of 1. How can it be wrong? And this guy said to me, he goes, well, look at all the people you've got here. You must be really amazing if you can get them here. And again, it kind of comes back to the skills needed for this pitch. Yeah, but the skills needed to organize a community are very different to the skills needed to deliver the work. But it held us in high regard to them. The other benefit that it gave us, we're talking a lot about how to stand out from other agencies. It gave us a USP when pitching because we could talk about the community and we could talk about how, look, you work brand side, so you're understanding of what's going on in the world. It's a bit blinker because you're kind of internally facing, obviously. Whereas in the agency world, we're interacting with so many people. But not only are we interacting with our clients, we're interacting with all of your peers, with 100 of your peers in these groups. You can come along as well. And we can keep you up to date with what's going on with your peers. And that was a really nice USP because going in and saying, we're a different kind of agency. We're purpose driven. And, we achieved our B Corp this year. We're very proud. And we're long-term partners to act in your best interest. And I don't know, our people, that's our real USP. Going in and saying those things is not particularly interesting because every other agency will say the exact same things. So having something...
they're important. They're important.
Yeah, of course they're important. No, it's the same. You need to say things
different. Correct.
Yeah, you need to say things that pass the opposite test. And what the opposite test is that whatever you say, would someone else, when asked, would they ever say the opposite? And if the answer is yes, you passed. So to say like our people are our biggest asset, no one's going to, realistically, right? No agency is going to say, well, no, our people aren't our biggest asset, right? It's a people business. So you fail the opposite test. Yeah, you can mention it if you want, but you're not going to win a pitch on it. But for us saying we run these communities, so we know exactly what's going on across 100 brands with your peers, and we can keep you up to date with what sort of stuff they're up to. And were you to say that to another agency, you got your ear to the ground with 100 of my peers? No, I don't have my ear to the ground with 100 of your peers.
Exactly.
And it passed the opposite test. And one thing I mean, look, when you're pitching, you always want to differentiate yourselves. We're kind of talking about differentiation here. Like, something like the round tables, it was a nice differentiator, but really, if you want to differentiate yourself, if you really want to, you've got to do something different at your core to everyone else. You have to come up with a wholly unique proposition that is the way that your agency operates, and go to market with that. And it's very scary to do that because no one else is doing that. And so you're like, well, what if it's a big disaster and we go bankrupt as a result and it's on me? So you kind of don't do it. But that's the way to. And there's a really great book. It's about 20 years old now. You might know it. I suspect you do. Called Blue Ocean Strategy.
That's right. Yeah.
It's quite a famous.
I'm using it currently with a client.
Happy days, right? So the authors of that book did a research study, and they found that in their research, 14% of businesses were swimming in the blue ocean, and the blue ocean is where you got loads of space around you because what you're doing is genuinely a bit unique, right?
Yeah.
And so 14% in the blue ocean. The rest of the 86% are in the red shark-infested waters, right, where it's really crowded. You're all doing the same thing. You're not standing out, and it's a bit dangerous. So those 14% of businesses in the blue ocean doing something genuinely different, they were getting 62% of all the profits. And the 86% in the red shark-infested seas had to share between them the meager 38% of all the profits left. So that's what we've got to do as agencies. We have to be brave, and we have to come up with genuinely unique propositions. Yeah, you can get a brand and consultant in and come up with a strap line, right? That sounds like nice, but you're still the same as all the other guys, right? What can you do in your proposition that is genuinely unique? Can you take a chance on something? And, if it pays off, you could be miles ahead of everyone else.
So, which leads us, I think, nicely into the last question. So this kind of because it must lead into that client development program agency-wide, because that's, you've got to bring the ideas together collectively from amongst your team and from outside to come up with something different. So to kind of finish off, what is that kind of client development program? How does it work? Because that's what you do now, isn't it? But broadly.
Yeah, that's what I do now. So it's similar to, so when we first launched it in my agency, it was kind of, back of a fag packet, just make it up as we go along. Whereas now, obviously, it's much more formalized, and I've had around 40 businesses go through the program. But essentially what we do, and what you could, if you're listening, you could potentially launch this yourself if you've got the know-how. It's about giving people the skills to deal with people. So it's all around people skills, emotional intelligence, and self-awareness. And it's not saying to people, you need to be this way with clients because that's how I am. Because that doesn't work. And we get very frustrated as agency leaders, like, oh God, why can't they all just be like us with clients? We know what we're doing. We can stand up to clients, and we can tell clients no when needed, and we can upsell work, and we can inspire them. Why can't they all do this? And the reason they can't all do this is, well, A, you're not teaching them, and B, you're just kind of expecting them to do what you do, and you don't really know how to explain it anyway. And actually a much better way is to explain like general principles of how you do things.
Yes.
And then have people work out how are they going to implement that in a way that works for them, given their communication style and their personality style. And that's
authentic to them.
Yes. It can't just be, this is what our agency leader does or what my managing partner does or whatever.
No.
It needs to be something that specifically works for you and your personality type. So you give people the tools to know what to do in certain situations, and then you allow them to work it out themselves. And look, you can have accountability. It's not like, right, you go and work it out. You then, what we do in our programs, people go in breakout rooms, they have conversations about this, and they come up with a plan. You get people to actually work out how they're going to do this, but you let them do it in their way. And we got amazing stories in our program of people in one story. My favorite probably is these guys. One of my clients was pitching, and the pitch was going horribly wrong. Client hated their ideas, hated them. It was just a nightmare apparently. So they're all side messaging like, "Oh my god, what do we do?" And one of the girls on the call was like, "Wait a minute, I think we did this in the program." Pulls up one of our frameworks actually, goes through it step by step whilst on the call without the client realizing, turns the whole pitch around. And they won like a multi 6-figure piece of work off the back of it.
Wow.
And it's, if you just give people the tools to do this stuff and then to work out how they should best implement it, they can, and people want to. But the problem is that most people in your agency who are at senior level, the mid-levels, or even the guys just below the senior management team, they shy away from this stuff because they're worried they're going to screw it up, because they're lacking in confidence. And they often lack in confidence because they're not sure how to deal with these situations. And you give them the tools, you watch that change.
Trenton, amazing. So in summary, across the discussion we've had for like half an hour or so, what's the kind of couple of things that you'd say to any agency leader about, winning more work and about building communities, and about being authentic in terms of your emotional intelligence as kind of people within an agency?
Yeah, wow, so much. I think, like I said, if I could have my time again running my agency, I would have really reinvented us in those last few years. So we went for 15 years, and from years 10 to 15, the market became very saturated and we weren't particularly unique. And we managed to stay ahead of the market for about 10 years. Those last 5 years we didn't. And I had an idea of like a new proposition for the agency, similar, but different from everyone else. And I didn't have the energy or the courage to flip us into that, if I'm honest. After 10 years, I was a bit tired. And there's also after 10 years, you're like, there's so much at stake here. I don't know if I want to take that risk, because what if it goes wrong and then I lose everything? So I never had the guts to do it. But so, I think my final thing, if you're listening, if you're an agency leader, be courageous and come up with something genuinely unique, not just a new strapline, but something that is genuinely unique to almost everyone out there, and go for it with that thing and be unique and be brave with it.
Trenton, it's been amazing. Thank you ever so much for joining me on the Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast. Where can people find out more about you?
LinkedIn. The good news about being called Trenton Moss is that there's not many of us. There's actually another one of me in Salt Lake City. He's a network engineer. So I'm not a network engineer in Salt Lake City. I'm the other guy.
You're the other guy. Excellent. Trenton, it's been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast series with your host, Mike Lander. Please subscribe so that you'll catch all the next episodes.